Hello and welcome to Newsroom, the show where we discuss all the current events going on at the moment, and the big one is local body elections, so we're going to sort of dedicate probably most of the show to that. With me on the panel is Paddy Lewis. Now, how do you describe yourself, Paddy? A blogger or a journalism tutor? We'll go with blogger.
Go with both.
And next to him, Carolyn Dean, of course, councillor, but stepping down at this election. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thanks, Hunter.
Now let's start and talk about the amount voting. We're having problems around the country, it sounds like, up and down the country. People don't seem to be voting in this round of local body elections. Why do you think? Paddy, we'll start with you. Why do you think people aren't ticking the boxes?
Well, I suppose, Hunter, the big thing with local body politics is that the apathy. I suppose people get their rates, the water's on, their rubbish gets collected, splash palace doesn't fall down on them, so most people don't really think about it until they get a rates bill, and even then I'd suggest that most people in Invercargill think, oh yeah, I must pay that. That's their limit of experience with local body politics. What I have heard in regards to the voting is that someone I know went in to pick up voting papers today from the council and was told that there might be a problem with New Zealand Post, so there could be quite a few people who haven't received voting papers. So New Zealand Post had problems in Auckland with the misprints in the candidate booklets. It might be that down here we've got voting papers going astray.
So that could account for 1% or something like that, maybe, in the end?
Well, apparently the person I know was told that quite a few people had not received voting papers. So, I mean, you wouldn't expect it to be a large thing, otherwise it would have been more of a stink kicked up. But
it's something.
It could be something.
Yeah. Carolyn, what do you think? Well, you're a sitting councillor. What feedback are you getting from people and making votes, making their choices?
Well, I hadn't heard anything to do with the postal issue. I was talking to the returning officer today and he didn't mention that, but I think that voters really turn out for a couple of reasons. One is when there's something controversial that has just happened or that's happening. So last term it was the 3-bin, 2-bin debacle.
I remember it well, yes.
Right, so people were engaged, they've all got a wheelie bin, they all had an opinion and they wanted to come out and really, make a stand. So I think that was one thing that probably drove numbers up last term, and that was at 60%. And the other thing I think is when there's a good mayoral race, that'll drive voter numbers. And of course last term we had Suzanne versus Tim, and you didn't know how that was going to go. So I think if you wanted to put your mayor across the line, then you turned out and you voted, and then you probably voted for councillors as well. But it's really the mayoral race, I think, that sort of drove that part of it. And I think that people not turning out to vote is a sign that everything's going okay. Nothing too much to complain about. We're not too concerned. You're doing an okay job, and so we don't really need to vote.
Paddy, what do you think? Because looking at your blog, you're pretty negative on the council, would have to say. I mean, you wouldn't deny that, would you? I mean, so
constructive criticism.
Well, okay, maybe constructive criticism, but do you think people are picking up on that? People don't seem to take a good look. And for me personally, I think local government's immensely important. Not as probably important as central government. But, it's the services to your door.
Yep. I mean, to be fair, as Carolyn said, in the mayoral race this time, there's no contest, and we saw that. I mean, Lindsay Dow and Kevin Middleton haven't put up anything. And so, Tim can sleepwalk back into the job for another 3 years. I think, with all due respect to Lindsay, his letter to the editor in the paper today indicated that there's nothing really, he hasn't really got anything to take Tim on with. As far as what Carolyn said, well, I think it's because a lot of the 3-bin decision this time, being the CBD upgrade and things like that, the decision's been taken, if you like, and so people see, even though there's still more work to do on that, people see it as being done and dusted. And so I think there is, people don't talk, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, they don't see the decisions that council makes translating as to anything that affects them, other than their rates bill, but then they don't consider that, they just pay the rates bill.
And that's the difference, I think, between CBD being the sort of topical issue this time and wheelie bins. everyone's got a wheelie bin and everyone's got an opinion, and everyone is either annoyed because they can't put some rose clippings, you know, in this new green bin, or they're happy that a million bucks wasn't spent on a useless third bin. And so that's really a tangible thing. Whereas CBD is so abstract, people don't really know what's happening. It's could be a 5-year project, could be 10, could be 12 million,
Well,
could be 16.
You may have said a mouthful there when people say they don't really know what's happening. I mean, is that the problem? I mean, we've been told that there's been consultation on this inner city upgrade. Has there really been consultation, do you think? And as you said, do people really know what's going on?
Oh, I think it's very difficult to interpret. You know, from the public point of view, it's difficult to interpret what council is actually saying. It's almost a full-time job. I think watching council from the outside and trying to interpret what's going on, even from the inside, I would say, well, no, we don't totally know what's going on, because as you said at the time, Hunter, at the end of the meeting where the decision was taken to adopt a plan, there was, you know, every precinct still is open to change and open to more consultation and open to changes to the budget. So, you know, I think it will be accurate to say people don't really know, because at this point a plan's been adopted, and we all know that, you know, plans can change.
Is that acceptable, Paddy, after all that time of planning and consulting and that sort of thing, to have that? I did look at that meeting that all councillors were basically saying, well, it's not done and dusted. Everything is open to adjustment, as did Mayor Tim.
Yeah, I suppose it's the old dollar each way, isn't it? It's that once the started talking about costs, then, you know, it's the old chestnut, oh, you know, 12 million, 16 million. Have we done enough consultation? Should we be consulting on this? Should we be talking about this? And I have to be honest that the councillors I've spoken to said that they got some information, but quite a bit of it they were getting at that meeting where decisions were made.
And where have
before that meeting.
Where have you had dialogue with them? Online, on your blog, or
no,
physically?
face to face, yeah. And just having a yarn about the CBD and the issues. And they feel too there was consultation with the CBD, the people in the CBD, but there hasn't been proper consultation with the ratepayers.
Well, that's what I've been hearing, that people that aren't coming, and there is a staff member here with kids going, I can't remember when I took them into the inner city. Perhaps they were the people that should be asked why they're not utilising the inner city, rather than getting people in off the street and putting stickers up on the wall. I mean, I'm just supposing that could be the idea. I'm not sure, because there has been a genuine sense of under consultation from everyone I speak to.
I suppose if you look at it this way, when I was in Wellington, we had there was a major investor coming into the CBD who said, we're going to do this, we want council to facilitate this, we're going to do all the research, we're going to do all the legwork, we're going to come up with a plan, and we want you guys to help us navigate through the district plan. So it was the retailer saying, if our research doesn't stack up, we'll go somewhere else. But if it does stack up, we want you. And so they did. I mean, they did a year's worth of behavioural research. They had people mapping how traffic went around the CBD, all that sort of thing. So they worked out what people were doing when they came to the CBD, and then they talked to them about, hey, what happens if we plonk this massive mall here? What are you going to do? And from there, and it took a long time, and then they came to us and said, as a council, and said, we need to have the traffic plan changed to do this and that and the next thing. So instead of driving it, the council was the facilitator, if you like, of the things that they couldn't do themselves. But they did all the work, and I think that's the problem with the CBD. It's like, here's a gold-plated solution, but what if no one comes, or what if people don't have money in their pockets? You know, you can't force people to come to the CBD by throwing $16 million into an upgrade.
Well, let's talk about the first upgrade, which I was reporting on at the time, and those were the promises that were made, Carolyn, at that stage in the late 90s, that this would be the thing that saves the city and brings energy back into the city. In fact, you could say that it was SIT that has brought that energy into the city, and that upgrade has failed. And in fact, they're looking at getting rid of parts of that upgrade.
Well, I think the process that Paddy's just described is the same process essentially that's happened here. We have spent 2.5 years going through looking at the behaviours of people, where the energy flows, what it's talking to, not just the stakeholder group that was formed was not just inner city people. It was, there were 100 people at that first meeting, and then it was whittled down to a smaller group. But there have been hundreds of people directly involved in the consultation and could have the opportunity to do it. So the process that Paddy's described, that does sound like the process we've gone through, and we will go through those traffic management we'll go through a testing phase to see exactly, how traffic flows are going to affect the CBD and vice versa. So, I think we're going along those lines. But in terms of the last CBD upgrade, I was overseas when that happened. And when I came home and I thought things were looking good, and didn't really understand the pillars, and I didn't understand the concept behind any of that. And I think that back then it really was based on, we had people who were involved in town planning, involved in the work, people who are involved in traffic management, like roading, engineering type people. And I think that the difference this time is that the consultants that have been involved have been doing this kind of work nationally and internationally, and they have a really good research-based approach to how to revive an inner city. So that's my hope, is that because we've used people that really understand, it's a science and an art involved in getting energy flows into a CBD, and the way that I think we set it up last time with Wagner Place being over the other side of a main highway from Esk Street and your main walking area, it's difficult. We've really affected the flow with a lot of things that we did. So I think, I have hope this time that we have taken an approach that is as pragmatic and as researched and as science-based as we can possibly get it to get the outcome that we want.
The difficulty is, though, Hunter, that retail has changed, and it's one of those things that people can come to a shop in the CBD and they can go there and say, oh, that costs $70. They go home, they get online, and they go, oh, I can have that shipped from the US for $35. And so it's up to, I think we're going about it the wrong way. It's like putting the solution in place, but we've got 7 shops, I think, in Essex Street that are empty at the moment. What happens if the retailers aren't adjusting? The warehouse, you only need to go past the warehouse and the other side of Levin Street to see that those car parks are pretty full most of the day. So what's going to happen when those retailers say, hey, we'd like something down here? Is the council going to say, oh no, sorry, we're focused on the CBD, you're outside the CBD? What happens if they threaten to pull the pin or go somewhere else, or, there's a whole lot of unanswered questions.
Should we be doing what Councillor Ludlow actually suggested, I think, at a meeting, that we should just go and pay that little bit extra, that $5 extra to shop locally? Is that it? Should we be actually sort of subsidising local retailers to keep them in the city, or is that not the answer? Should we just embrace whoever comes to the city? We've got a lot of $2 shops and that sort of thing. Those are the things you can't buy online. I mean, if a button falls off in the middle of town, you go to the $2 shop, buy a sewing kit. I mean, you're not going to bother online. That's maybe why they're thriving, isn't it?
And maybe because they're $2 shops. The difference, you could say I'm going to buy locally and pay an extra $5, but it's not an extra $5. It's, sometimes it's an extra, it's 50% less. And again, that just comes down to the retailers probably needing to look at their business model. But, it's not saying there's not good retailers here, but when someone can look at something in a shop and go home and find it for half the price, it's really approaching it from the wrong direction, I think.
You've been quite dismissive to councillors. I saw an exchange with you actually online with Councillor Lewis, and you were saying, well, you voted for it, it's a debacle, over-costing debacle, that's what you believe, and you're condemning councillors for that?
I think $16 million is an awful lot of money. Whether it's 12 or 16, it's an awful lot of money to spend on a small area of town. There's a lot of other places that could probably be better spent.
Well, I think, Hunter, I think a city centre is it's really the heart and soul of a city. And I've travelled overseas pretty extensively, and you know those places that you go to, I remember driving around in Canada and Alberta on the big highways, and you come into a town and it's just big box, big box, big box. You can pull off into a sort of a parking lot, big box all around, and then you just carry on. You don't even know that you've really been in a town. There's no heart and soul in those places. But when you go to somewhere that's got like a village feel to it, where it comes down into one lane each way, and there's trees and there's places to sit and there's vibrance and there might be street entertainment and those sorts of things. That's a place with a heart. And with students coming to SIT, you really need to provide somewhere where they can go and sit and eat their lunch and socialise and feel like there's a vibrancy and a heart. And I think the retailers can and will adapt to the way that the world is going. The H&Js have found that retail, they don't sell in the same way that they used to, but that the food and the coffee side of it has really increased. So you have to sort of adapt and be agile and go with the flow, and council can't make that happen, but I think council can provide the environment for a vibrant heart and soul in a city, because without it the city just essentially dies and has a kind of a dead element to it, and people want to connect with other people, and they can do that at in a city centre, in a shop. They can't do it online. So it doesn't just all come down to cost. I'm going to save 50% here and da-da-da. You're not going to do everything online all the time, because you won't connect with people. And when you can connect with people in a city centre, then I think that's what we were out to achieve, right at the beginning of this term, when council sat down at their retreat and said, what are our top priorities? Every single councillor that was there, independently of any other councillor, rated it as number one. And I think it's because you can tell that when there's no vibrant heart to a city, it's a difficult place to bring people to and to market.
Well, there may be the other opinion, though, I guess, that we're through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, certainly into the mid-80s, before farming really took a blow, that this was the centre of commerce, and everyone had to come to Invercargill to do their business, conduct their business, go banking, see the accountant, do the shopping, summer, winter shopping, even supermarket shopping and that sort of thing. That's all changed, isn't it? Can we not just accept that maybe the need for a vibrant inner city in Invercargill ceases to exist, and that it is simply a place where we pass through, and Windsor's going off, Glengarry's getting an extra boost with what's happening out there with the people of Glengarry, but also Bupa going in, and plus South City's looking very good as well. Maybe that is the future, that the suburban centres will fill in for those everyday activities.
Yeah, well, I suppose just picking up on one thing that Carolyn said about the big box stores. I mean, big box pays big rates, and if that's working, why knock that? The other thing about the CBD is that you want to have a heart, but come into Esk Street before, say, 10 o'clock in the morning or after 5 o'clock at night, and it's dead, unless you're on the terps with the lads. And then there's plenty of them around sort of after 10.
Well, it does look pretty busy in the weekend, doesn't it, downtown? Yeah. An entertainment centre.
I think the place where people connect in Invercargill are places like Queen's Park and the parks and reserves. And I think there's probably better value to be had in throwing not millions, but some money at those places to make them more accessible and more attractive. Part of the CBD upgrade plan said, look, we're going to put in parks so kids can play and they can skate over in Wood Street and everything like that. I don't come to town with my kids to drop them off at a park to play while I go shopping. That's just...
That's the reality of it.
Yeah. So I think it's got to stand or fall on its own merits, and I don't think $16 million is going to help that.
Carolyn, just before we go to a break, any thoughts there?
Well, I kind of like your idea, Hunter, of could we change the whole model and have these suburban,
but
villages
it's happening
and that sort
naturally,
of thing.
isn't it? I mean,
it's
that's what we're
happening.
seeing.
Yeah. So.
And we developed as a city centre naturally with all the farming, the centre hub for the region. I mean, why not just let it? I personally am a big fan of the inner city. Don't get me wrong, but maybe that's just natural progression.
Yeah, so I don't dislike that idea, but I think that the big key factor is probably SIT. And the students that are there, and for them to be able to come into an inner city and for it to feel like a vibrant kind of a place, I think it's still important to have it because of the CBD's proximity to SIT.
Thank you both for your ideas, and we'll be back just after this break with more on local government and the coming elections, which of course I hope you've all posted your votes because today was the last day to do so. Welcome back to the show, and I want to ask the panellists first. I was going to do this at the beginning, but I wanted to ask, have you voted? Have you voted, Paddy?
Yes.
Have you, Carolyn? You've got your papers. You're actually in the district,
Yeah.
aren't you? And I want to get to that because you're actually advocating for Gary Tong.
Well, I've been giving Gary some advice on a political
What's your connection
level sort
there
of
with
thing.
Gary?
Well, I know Gary through his work at the Invercargill Holiday Park and the environmental side of things. So he and his partner Karen have been working away for years really, putting in recycling, making sure it's as sustainable as it can be. And so that's how I met him through that. And I think that, when you've got an election with the incumbent mayor's gone, so that kind of makes it...
Two councillors running.
And then, so you've got the incumbent mayor gone, and then two incumbent councillors standing. I think often when you have two incumbents and then a new person, there can be a pretty good chance of that new person sort of coming in. So, I think Gary is he's a kind of salt of the earth kind of guy. He's incredibly practical. He's been involved in search and rescue and the police. He's been in the tourism sector, and he's a real people person. So he'll stop on the street and talk to anyone.
We do see former police personnel showing up all over local government, don't we? That trust
True.
thing does seem to be, the perception of trust out there seems to win votes, doesn't it?
Yes, although Lindsay Dowell is a former policeman, and that's probably not going to win him the mayoralty this time around. But yeah, you're right. I think it sort of lends itself to, people feeling like they can just sort of fall back on someone, because that's how you feel. Well, hopefully that's how you feel about people in the police force, and certainly search and rescue. I mean, that to me that sort of says a lot in itself. Someone that can get in and in a tough situation and be sensible and practical and get a job done. I mean, that's really what you want, I think.
Paddy, you spend quite a bit of time, as I said, going at the Invercargill City Council. What about the District Council? They are said to be one of the more efficient. They run with money, everything. One of the highlights, if you like, or stars of local government in New Zealand. Do you take an active interest?
I'm just going to check. Just making sure Carolyn's wearing an authorisation statement there really after that. That was a very good pitch.
No, I'm not outstanding, so I don't have to authorise.
No, for Gary, I mean.
Well, Hunter asked me, and so
I just wanted to know the connection there, and you gave it to us, which is great.
Yeah.
And you're obviously endorsing him, but I'm hearing many different things about who will win. In fact, no one has. I can't get a majority on who will win it.
It's one of those things that I'm personally pleased that Frana Cardino's gone, because I think it was time for her to go, and she'd done her dash and obviously was able to do good things on a national level for the council when the Helen Clark government was involved, because she had good connections there. But Yeah, now it's very hard to tell, and again, it's one of those things where, what's the issue? Roading?
Well, infrastructure, yeah, seemed to be the key issue.
And around the mountain.
Yeah, and the cycle trail, which looks pretty impressive when you see it.
Is that the thing with the district, that there is a lack of issues?
Yeah, I think it is. It's just that
it's an efficient branch. Efficient.
I think there's probably areas that they could pick up on, but they're always going to be behind the eight ball because they've got that massive roading network. And so, that takes up an awful lot of resources. And
so what will it take, really? I've been asking people, Frana Cardno in particular, for, I guess, Fonterra tankers to be slipping off the roads before the central government actually does wake up and do something about the sometimes appalling conditions of some roads.
Well, I suppose the science is improving too. I've seen reports where, there's going to be cheaper ways to build roads in terms of the raw materials and things like that. So who knows? But as far as the meat and potatoes of the district go, it's like Gore as well. I mean, what's the issue in Gore?
Unopposed. Tracy Hicks is unopposed.
I suppose it comes down to too. There's been a real lack of analysis, I think, in the local media. I mean, I know Q's run the candidate forums and things like that. But I've been surprised at the lack of analysis in the newspapers, and I think I think it was last election, Hamish McNeely, who's at the ODT now, really got stuck into it for the Express. But I've been very disappointed in the Times in terms of there's been no real analysis, and there's also been a lot of. It's funny how there's a lot of photos of incumbents popping up doing nice PR. Shots around the place, but no one's really setting the agenda.
Incumbents on one organisation.
ILT. I mean, I think Alan Dennis had 3 PR shots in a week, but it's really no one's really setting an agenda.
You are quite negative about local media. We have to say that in your blog, that no one is covering. Well, you're saying that no one's covering what's happening in local government and that sort of thing. In fact, you said that you and one other blogger were the only ones really looking at local government. Do you believe that the media aren't? Or what questions should media be asking?
Well, as an example, my journalism students, when we did official information requests. So this is how you do it, and a couple of them flicked off Official Information Act requests or Local Government Official Information Act requests to Environment Southland. Environment Southland just sent the material back, so that was a bit of a bugger. But at the same time,
but good on Environment Southland.
Yeah, good on Environment Southland. I got a report from Environment Southland last week that showed how many Official Information Act requests they'd had in the last year, and it included local media, and there was one. When I counted at least 20 or 30, I can't remember, I think it was 28 things that should have sparked a Local Government Official Information Act request. There's agenda items that are picked up. If you read an agenda, that would be really good news stories, but it doesn't get covered, and you've got to ask yourself, is no one taking the time to read the agenda, or is it just turn up to the meeting and pick the low-hanging fruit?
Well, can I just say that we are?
Oh, yeah, I know.
We are.
Sorry, with all due respect to present company accepted,
everyone else except you.
I'm not looking for praise,
but you could say that was true because you've done a whole election special with every single candidate getting to say their piece. And I'd agree to a certain extent with Paddy that I sat with my grandmother to oversee her voting, and she didn't know anything about the candidates. That was why she sort of wanted me there. She didn't know anything about.
So the supply of information is not enough?
Well, it is there if people go to it, like vote.co.nz is there with everyone. Well, they should be there with profiles, although some probably aren't. But I think that information's not pushed out probably enough, and it's not really the right kind of information. So it is hard, and I think that might be why incumbents, especially in Southland, tend to always get back in, because at least you know something about them. Whereas you don't know anything about these names you've never heard. It's a punt.
So it's profile, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose, but I've heard people, the number of people I've wanted to remove from the gene pool over the past few weeks because they've voted for someone because they're their Facebook friend. I mean, I've got Facebook friends, and probably half of them wouldn't be suitable for local government, and the other half I wouldn't vote for. So if you're voting for someone on the basis that they're your friend on Facebook and not based on anything else, I heard there was one candidate who wanted their children to be able to go and swim at the beach. Is that your policy platform, really? So there isn't a lot of information, or there is a lot of information, but all you hear is, I've been on council for 4 terms, vote for me. Sorry, that's...
I like
or I'm a 5th or 6th generation Southlander. Seems to be a big thing that those of us that arrived in the late 90s aren't worthy of being called Southanders.
I like Angela Newell's sign, and it says, please re-elect Angela
Right.
Newell. It's kind of like they're very polite.
Look, can I
approach.
ask you, Paddy, have you ever thought of standing yourself?
Yeah,
you're a critic, but...
It's an interesting thing, actually, because when I worked for Hutt City Council, we had a set thing that a lot of people who wanted to stand for council couldn't come to meetings during the day. And so we made a rule that meetings would start at 6 p.m. And I think the way it's structured at the moment, it cuts out a lot of people with having meetings start at 4 and things like that. It cuts out a lot of people who would otherwise probably throw their hats in the ring. I mean,
and that's the reason why you count yourself
That's
out?
one of
Yep.
the reasons, yeah.
And you think that counts out a lot of people that are sitting... I mean, surely that could be changed. I know, in fact, in '98, when they did change the meeting time from later to back, it was so that television and people, we could cover things and get them to air that night. But, I mean, I assume if it was done then, it could be done now.
Yeah, yeah.
And you would be keen then?
It would just, I suspect it would just have to be a resolution of council. And, I think that would make a difference. There's certainly people I've spoken to, or people who I have thought would be good candidates, have said, I can't go to a meeting that starts at 4 o'clock because I've got childcare reasons or I've got work reasons or something like that. So I think that's part of it. The other thing is that there is that kind of, it's Invercargill, the incumbents always get in, and so it's really showing people how they can make a difference.
We're just going to take a quick break, and we'll be back for the last 10 minutes of the show, and I want to talk about amalgamation, actually, amongst other things, so we'll be back shortly. We'll see you soon. And welcome back to the show, the last section. We're going to talk about amalgamation because it seems to be a bit of a topic floating around, either being foisted upon local authorities by central government or recommendations from the people actually within those local authorities. What do you think, Paddy? Do you see a day when perhaps the whole of the southern region is one unitary authority?
Maybe not the whole of the southern region, but certainly I think there's efficiencies that can be gained. I think it's important, though, and I've said this, that Environment Southland stand apart. I think you can't bring everyone together and not have an independent oversight, and that's what their role is.
So
really
to prevent conflicts of interest?
Well, no, I mean independent oversight in terms of environmental and
regulatory.
The regulatory kind of issues. So I think that's important. The biggest thing would be that matching the communities of interest. So, Invercargill, do Invercargill and Gore fit together? I think probably one area that hasn't been explored enough, in reading the Shared Services Committee minutes where the councils look at where they can combine and cut costs and things, that's moving at slower than a snail's pace, and I think that could probably be sped up. But again, you have things like IT projects where Gore says, and so it's, how do you get them all to take part? How do you get down the track and have one of them pull out, make the whole thing, and then one pulls out and makes the whole thing fall over? So there's quite a few issues around it.
Carolyn, what are your thoughts? When you were sitting around that, well, you're still sitting around that council table, at least till Saturday. What are your thoughts on amalgamation, and what was the attitude, if there was one, of other councillors?
Well, it's
I
not.
know Tim might like to be a regional mayor.
Tim occasionally has stated that he thinks that it's going to happen, and it could be the next thing, but generally around the council table we don't discuss it. It's not a high topic of interest. We are obviously doing shared services with STC and Gore, and also Clutha sort of coming into that mix as well, and to an extent I think that is enough progress. on efficiencies, that I guess it means that nobody's really sort of desperate to start an amalgamation process. I would want to see what are the clear benefits going to be, because I know that when you start down these paths, the theory is that things are going to be more efficient,
cheaper rates,
we're going to save money, less CEOs and less, senior staff, and everyone can sort of do more, and we'll just have these sort of key people over the overarching. But I used to work at ICC and have worked for a number of councils in a consulting role, and I think the reality of when you pull lots of forces together like that is you just blow up 3 times bigger, and the costs sort of push out in other ways that you didn't expect, a whole lot of unintended consequences. So I'd want to know really clearly that amalgamation was going to can't have some benefits to it, because I think when you push communities together like that have a unique identity, that there can be some sort of detrimental effects to it.
Well, we're supposed to be sharing services, I guess, through Venture Southland would be one for the region. Your thoughts on Venture Southland? Venture hasn't been raised in this election really at all. And in fact, the last election as well, everyone just, when the question was asked about Venture, it was like they do a great job for Southland, it's ongoing. But do you see the evidence of this great job for the staffing levels and I guess the money that goes in? And Gore give them $50,000 a year, let's say that.
Yeah, I suppose I see the benefit in Venture through the work that the enterprise group do. I don't really see it anywhere else. Ange Newell does a great job with the creative team and bringing the Shakespeare in the Park and the Buskers Festival and things like that. But I'd like to see, there should be more cost recovery there, I think. But I think the real issue is that I don't think, and Carolyn might correct me if I'm wrong here, but I've never seen an efficiency audit carried out on any of the councils. And I've been here for 10 years. That's a long time to go without looking at something like that. And I think that would be a good starting point. An efficiency audit would really show where the needs are, and where, if not amalgamation, then certainly things could be shared across the various councils and council-controlled organisations.
Carolyn, we were talking earlier, you were talking about a recent Venture meeting and some interesting initiatives. What are those? What do you see in the future that Venture's offering up?
First of all, I want to comment on Paddy's suggestion of an efficiency audit. Brilliant idea. I would love to see an efficiency audit.
So there hasn't been one?
Well, I've been on council for one
not
term,
that I recall
so
in 15 plus years.
I mean, even the concept of that is sort of, what would that involve? How do we do an efficiency audit? I'm all about efficiency, so if that send me some details about how that could be done, because that sounds fantastic. And so in terms of Venture, I just had my last meeting of Venture yesterday, and really there are a number of potential game changers for Southland that Venture have been working on for quite a long time, but they're the only agency that really have the continuity and even the mandate to be able to sort of work on projects that do take a lot of time. So one would be the oats, and these were reported in the paper, so they were picked up by the media, but one would be the oats project. And I just find that really exciting, because if we were to really move ahead in that area, we would be able to use a lot of land that's not suitable for dairying for just a much more diversified use. We'd be diversifying our economy. We'd be supplying high value protein. Oats have got all these health benefits. They actually lower cholesterol. They've got low inputs, there's much lower amounts of fuel are needed, much lower fertiliser. There's a whole lot of benefits to them, and they would probably fit in really well because you don't use dairying land. So I mean, that would be one. The living cell technologies would be another one, and if Southland were to be the quarantine facility for that project, it would mean a big shift in what our focus is. And what I like about that one too is that it's such a positive project for humanity, because you're looking at diabetes and Parkinson's, treating diabetes and Parkinson's. So for Southland to be, such an integral element of something that could change humanity like that, it's just super exciting. So, I think those are, two of the really big ones. And the other one, the Burt Munro is doing incredibly well. It's been listed in Time magazine as a bucket list event to go to. This time last year, I think we had 50 entries. We've got 140 this year. So that's another thing that I think Venture's been involved in that can be a real game changer. So I'm feeling really positive about that input of Venture, but a lot of that is subject to disclosure. Can't be, the details can't be publicised and talked about, so it makes it really hard for Venture to say that what they're up to and how it's going.
I have to say though, I certainly remember reporting on topo climate and that sort of thing that took place in the late 90s, early 2000s, but also products that were going to be miracle products like meadow foam. We were going to grow meadow foam here that was a basis for cosmetics and that sort of thing. It was going to be huge. We were going to grow wasabi and that sort of thing down here, but after a lot of work by councils and that sort of thing, different agencies, they really didn't come to anything. Can we be sure that these ideas will we see them through to fruition, do you think? Is that your feeling?
No, that's a question mark. These projects that I'm talking about are those sort of, not exactly speculative, but they're projects that require a whole lot of back-end work because of the potential, but it's never a given. So Venture does work on projects like that, as well as a whole lot of other projects that are much more sort of bread and butter type projects. But no, these ones could essentially go either way. But if one or all of them came off, it would really change the landscape of Southland and our future. So you've got to be able to do that though. There's got to be some element in our governance and in our councils and in our society that allows you to explore possibilities in a way that gives it continuity and resource and really gives it a good chance.
Now I wanted to talk about there's going to be 3 new councillors around the City Council table. We're not sure who they're going to be. One particular candidate did quite well though at the by-election last year, so perhaps she may make it. I'm only speculating there, but Carolyn, you've done one term. Did you lose interest in it, or what's happened? Why only one term on council at the moment?
Well,
I know we've talked about this before, but now why was only one term enough?
I think that we talk about it as only one term, but it's 3 years, and 3 years is quite a lot of time when you're sort of at a life stage like I am, with a career and I've got my property and sort of a whole lot of, I've retrained in the middle of that term. I've started a new career path. And
so you hadn't lost hope in local government, is what I'm asking.
Well, I got to the point where I was sort of really passionate and really motivated and really, sort of productive. And then I got to a point sort of later in the term where I felt that start to sort of, the energy sort of died down. And I think you have to be quite mindful when you're in a position like that you really want to bring your best to it all the time. And so, having made the decision to not stand, I do feel a lot more positive and a lot more energised about council activities and about Southland. So I think for me there was I didn't want to get into a rut. I didn't want to get too comfortable, and I didn't want to feel, that I was sort of just warming a seat. So it was appropriate for me to sort of change direction and give someone else who is really passionate about it a chance to sort of get in and get involved as well. And I don't have any intention of not being involved. I just, starting to find council was just, there's 13 people and there's a lot of time that you spend sort of negotiating and things don't happen, and I think you can be really effective in other ways. You don't have to be around the council table.
Paddy, your thoughts on the City Council at the moment? As I said, you're, I would say, arch critic of the City Council. You call it the Kremlin, basically the building, and perhaps the people in it What would make you uncritical of the City Council? Let's talk about
That's a good question.
What really would make you step back and go, well, like, I'm really
They've done a
happy
good
with the
job.
Invercargill City Council.
I'll give you an example. I mean, I call it the Kremlin because it's a bit like Soviet Russia in that, you know, you only get the information that you're deemed to be fit to take in.
Without using the Official Information Act, you mean?
And without turning up to the meetings.
Yeah, some of us have to work.
So, because there's a lot of information at meetings.
Oh no, don't worry. I have people who feed me the information.
People who feed you information.
KGB.
Right?
Yeah. But I'll give you
secret police.
I'll give you no.
You're incredibly intuitive. It's one or the other.
Just the benefits of being a journalist is that you know yourself. You can get information from all sorts of places.
Well, you do, but it's discerning what information's relevant and what's real. Actually, isn't it?
And
Filtering
it's through
it.
someone else's filter, I suppose, if it's.
I always have 2 or 3 filters. But I suppose one of the things is, and just as an example, when I was on the executive management team at Hutt City Council, we had very little go into public excluded unless it was commercially sensitive. Now, in the first year of this triennium, there were 154 items in public excluded at the full council meetings, and you know, going through that, there's a lot of stuff that didn't need to be there. There were things like, you know, discussing the boy racer gathering area. That shouldn't be in public excluded. That should be open for discussion.
I think Ian Pottinger mentioned that actually at the Chamber of Commerce debate, candidate debate. He did mention that instance that he felt that, well, why on earth is this public excluded?
And it just makes it look, and I think, I was trying to recall the only time where we had an issue in the Hut with public excluded, and it was around a $60 million wastewater project, which naturally you have to keep under wraps because you've got international players involved who are going to throw their toys if their tender prices leaked. And that was the only time we really had an issue over public excluded. Here it seems everything's in public excluded, and I think Dunedin has shown the way, and again, Paul Orders, it's a shame he's going back to Wales, but he came in and said, look, within 6 weeks of the meeting, the stuff that was in public excluded, where possible, unless it's commercially sensitive, is going to be released and put on our website. There's just a real dearth of information down here, and that creates all sorts of issues, as we saw around the Don Street car park, when that information comes out, which can be avoided completely.
Which will be very interesting to watch, actually. Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
Which can be avoided completely by just being open. There's no reason. We used to sit around in executive management team meetings, and someone would say, "Oh yeah, I think this should be in public excluded." We'd say, "Well, you know," and you play devil's advocate and say, and you'd end up saying no. And so it became things like the chief executive's remuneration, which comes out anyway, major commercial contracts, and things like that. And we didn't have a great deal of problems with the media in general because we were feeding that information out.
So you were saying there's a problem down here. Could it not be, though, that there's so much now, in the days when there was a works department attached to the council and that sort of thing, that those things weren't, because there was no one else tendering for every step along the way, then you could make those, there was no secrets to be kept, but perhaps now in this free market environment we work in, and I put it to Tim Shadbolt, and he said, yes, that's the reality really, that there's going to be a lot of things conducted behind closed doors.
The problem is, though, that I don't have a problem with the contracts for the Queen's Drive upgrade and things like that. It's things like, I had a wee list of them here somewhere. We had the appointment of trustees to the Southern PHO. You know, why does that need to be in public excluded? So look, we've got these people that have been put forward. Who do we think should go? It's not going to be controversial. So why does that stuff need to be in public excluded? The other thing is tabling reports at meetings. And so there's a real lack of transparency, and it comes back and it bites the council in the bum every time. We saw it with the A to B yacht race. We've seen it with Americana. We've seen it with any number of things. So I think there is a real need for transparency, and there's probably a need for a culture change down there too. The staff in general, the staff that I deal with, if you go into ground floor and you deal with the receptionists and the cashiers and the building department people, fantastic. I think there's a real issue with the senior management, and there needs to be a real shake-up. And I mean, I know that the council had the chance, and they had a very good candidate who was about to be reappointed, but councillors rolled over and the incumbent stayed. So, I mean, the council missed an opportunity a few months ago, and so it's really, they've made their bed and they've got to line it when they get a kicking in the papers, I suppose.
Well, you were privy to those discussions. We're talking about Richard King, obviously. How did you feel at the time about, you saw the other candidates, didn't you?
Well, actually, yes, and I just want to
Go ahead.
I just want to go back to what Paddy said about the transparency and the public excluded parts. I agree with 100% that there are, and especially at the beginning of the term, there were items going into public excluded, and you know, as a new councillor, I didn't really understand why that was either. And I think as the term went on, and as you know, I was able to chair the infrastructure committee, we did our best to put things, to not have anything in public excluded, only contracts and that sort of thing. Because Paddy's exactly right. If you're not open with it, you will get your bum kicked later on, and you know, don't be surprised, because that's, you know, that's the nature of it. So I mean, I hope that you might have seen an improvement through the term.
I won't talk about 2012 or 13.
Or maybe next term,
Right.
you know, with even more. But it's not. I don't think it's a matter of sort of trying to hide things behind public excluded, but just that there's that uncertainty. Well, if there's doubt, then you sort of advised that it should go that way. And so if there could be, you know, any kind of uncertainty about somebody, you know, being spoken about, and that it could turn out badly, or money involved, or anything like that. It's just I think the rule of thumb has been, if you're in doubt, don't do it. But
it goes to the extreme, though. I think really goes to the extreme. And you know, if you're worried about people saying something about someone, then that comes down to councillors' personal judgment, I suppose.
yeah.
Well, look, we've unfortunately run out of time, and it would be really good, hopefully, to have you guys back on the panel, because there's a lot of things to cover, and it's going to be a really interesting weekend. Of course, we've got an election special at 5:30 on Saturday coming to you, and we're going to have as many results as possible, and we'll certainly have the city, perhaps not the Dunedin results and that sort of thing, but we hope to bring you everything. We've got 5:30, so tune in. And Paddy Lewis, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks,
Blogger
Hunter.
Paddy Lewis, and Carolyn Dean, thank you very much for your time. It's been most enlightening. And for you at home, don't forget, if you haven't voted, then get in there and cast a special vote, or get your papers in as soon as possible and have your say. Thanks very much for joining us.